Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Wings Podcast. This is your host, Milind Agnihotri. On today's show, we will meet Yashodhan Gharat. Yash grew up in Dombivali, India, spending a lot of time at his family village along the Konkan Coast, enjoying the outdoors whenever he could. His love for nature and hobbies like birdwatching led him to a bachelor's in environmental science and sustainability from Cornell University, US, and later to a master's in development from the Institute of Development Studies in the UK. These degrees and his work experience in the last few years have led him into a life of international development work, specifically focused on agriculture. Yash currently lives and works as a country director in Malawi, Southern Africa, for a social enterprise called One Acre Fund. Welcome, Yash, to this episode of Wings Podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Yash, I was looking up at the website of One Acre Fund, specifically, what is this organization? What does it do? Where is it based? But more importantly, what is its vision? And I came across a beautiful vision statement of your organization. And it says, we envision a future in which every farm family has the knowledge and means to achieve big harvests, support healthy families, and cultivate rich soil. Why don't we begin our conversation on this vision statement of the organization that you work at and how it manifests in the everyday work that you do as a country director in this rich and beautiful country called Malawi?
Yeah, sure. I think you're absolutely right to focus on that vision statement. I've always said that there might be many companies, many organizations where the values and the vision are often on the walls, but not in the minds and hearts of people as they do their everyday work. Whereas with One Acre Fund, I've always felt the difference that we actually live our values. They're not just in nice posters or in our email signatures, but they're actually something that we use as guiding principles to make decisions or to drive operations to serve our clients, our farmers. So I do feel very proud of that. And I think you're right that it is a beautiful vision statement. So the whole idea comes from the experience of one of our founders, who is now the CEO in Kenya about 15 years ago. What he realized is that a lot of poverty in sub-Saharan Africa, as also in India or many other places, is concentrated in rural areas where most of the population there are farming. They're farmers, and the tools or technology to make farmers more food secure and more prosperous already exist. In India, we experienced it as the Green Revolution. But in many other parts of the world, that technology and that know-how has not yet become accessible or affordable. And so the whole idea was, let's take these tools and technology. It might be as simple as, better quality seed, microdosing or proper application of fertilizer. Let's take those tools, let's provide them to farmers on loan, so that it becomes affordable, and then let's deliver it as close to their doorstep as possible, so that it becomes accessible. And that was the whole idea behind this. So it's not necessarily rocket science in terms of the idea itself, but it's more the implementation and how we actually do it, how we operationalize it. That's kind of become the major innovation for One Acre Fund. And so this vision kind of attempts to capture what we want to see as the overall impact and the outcome of that work. So we want to make sure that as farmers access better inputs, they have big harvests. So they become more food secure. We want to make sure that they're taking care of one of their biggest assets for the future, which is the soil that they farm on. And we want to make sure that it's not just about prosperity or income, but also about health, nutrition, and sort of overall quality of life. And that's where the healthy families aspect comes in. So that's where the vision comes from, and that's sort of the grounding experience that vision is built on.
I was fortunate to have begun my work life, Yash, many years back in a company called Wipro in India, when
Mm-hmm.
in the mid 80s. And
Mm-hmm.
I spent my first 5 or 6, yeah, little over 5 years of my work life with this company. And I had the first hand experience of how the organization evolved in its early days when I was also starting my work life. And I think I consider myself extremely fortunate to have had this experience where I see myself and my organization all both taking baby steps and evolving. And
Mm-hmm.
what I also gather from you, Yash, is this also seems to have happened with you with One Acre Fund, that over the last 6, 7 years that you have been associated with them, you've kind of evolved and played multiple roles
Mm-hmm.
in which also contributed to your growth and the organization's growth, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I can say a little bit about that. So I've been associated with One Acre Fund for 8 years now, so since November 2014. And when I joined, the organization was 7 years old, and we were just starting out in a handful of countries at that point. And now we are in 9 countries. We have over 10,000 employees. We are serving over 1 point something million farmers all across these 9 countries that we work in. And yeah, so I think having it is a privilege to have been part of an organization as it sort of matures from the early days of a startup with vision and passion, but maybe not as much structure or systems. And now to see it become this more mature, large organization that's trying to kind of maintain the need for controls and systems with the kind of passion and entrepreneurial spirit with which it started. So that's a really interesting experience. I think it's a very formative experience, and I think you're right that I have also personally grown within that time a lot. So I started with One Acre Fund as a new country scout, which was a position designed to find new markets for our program to grow in. And I worked as a new country scout, uh, supporting one of our pilots in Uganda for 1 year. And then I moved to Malawi to start working on more R&D, like innovations, and then since then have grown within the organization. So it's been interesting, even personally. Like when I was a new country scout, and we had a team of maybe 20 people in Uganda, and we were doing everything, like paying office rent personally to sorting out the water tap when the water tap stopped working in the office, or going to the printer to print out trainings, to now having a team of over 400 people, that and like so many of these things are automated, or there are roles for everything, and I'm not personally doing any of this work. And so yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it sounds very interesting because from a startup to a mature organization, as they say, is the role evolves from doing everything to get the job done to probably looking
Exactly.
at the big picture and seeing how it is implemented on an everyday basis. So this is so beautiful. But then where did this love for soil or love for agriculture or love for nature happen to you? Because and you've made
Yeah.
this into a not only a career choice, but you seem to have made this into a life choice of dedicating
Right.
yourself to the preservation, protection and growth of nature.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the agriculture kind of lean happened a little bit by circumstance.
Mhm.
The original love is has been for nature and conservation. So growing up in Dombivali, there were people around me that had a love for nature that I spent time with, whether just family friends or family themselves, or just people that I met in sort of our social circle. But then I had an opportunity to actually engage with that love because my family comes from the Konkan Coast. So I would spend a lot of time in the village, surrounded by nature, by the coconut groves, mango groves, the ocean. Part of my family is also from Sangli on the Deccan Plateau in Maharashtra. So going there as well, a different kind of nature, the kind of vast open grasslands and stony rocky mountains and stuff like that. So I think I was able to engage that love very early on, and that led to sort of a passion for working in conservation, uh, which which then led to me doing my degree in environmental sciences, as you mentioned, at Cornell in the US. And that eventually led to me working in sort of sustainable agriculture, trying to make sure that we are practicing agriculture that also helps conserve the nature around. And that's how I kind of sort of came into agriculture and into farming. So I think it's been a nice trajectory. It makes sense for me because I like agriculture because it involves working with people, which I really enjoy. But it still has the environmental and biological side to actually growing the crop, which helps me indulge my sort of nerd when it comes to biology and ecology and conservation. So I think it's been a really really good balance. And of course, it is, as you said, it's a life choice, but that's because agriculture and farming systems move on a scale that are, not, it's not a 1 year thing, right? It's like a 10, 20 year thing. Even the green revolution in India did not happen overnight. When we talk about anything to do with farming, we have to talk about a scale of many, many years, because that's how long it takes for ecosystems or ecologies to grow and form, and for behavior change to happen. And so that's kind of where I see that kind of longer commitment coming in. So yeah, it's not something that I can say, oh, I'll work here for a year, then I'll move on. If you're really committed to seeing change or to seeing impact, it's a longer term thing.
You know, specifically in India, uh,
Hmm.
when young kids, boys or girls, look for work-life careers and educations that supports it, more often than not in the middle-income families in India where we all come from,
Yeah.
the goal or the pursuit has always been for higher professional education, whether it is in engineering or medicine, law or
Hmm.
finance or MBA, etc. You
Hmm.
chose to pursue a career in environmental studies and sustenance. Uh,
Yeah.
hats off to you to have not only made that choice but walked that path over the years. But love to hear from you, how was it received by your parents when you actually broke the news to them, because you are their only child, and
Yes.
most Indian parents would want to see their kids settle down in a good life in some of those professional studies that I spoke of.
Yeah. 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 You're absolutely right. I think I was very lucky to have parents and family friends and a community really broadly, that was supportive of different hobbies and different pursuits. I think uh, love for nature or working in conservation was seen as sort of a positive thing. Of course, you can't turn hobbies or positive things into savings and a comfortable life or good quality of life. But I think that's where my parents came in, where they kind of suggested that if I wanted to study this, I should do it at a good place and I should aim to do something to the best extent possible. So if you're going to, if you want to work in conservation, let's try and get you to a very good school, to a prestigious program, so that after you study it, you can still find a good career, whether it's in India or whether it's elsewhere. And that's how I ended up going to Cornell, because at that time, finding a bachelor's program in India, a very well recognized or prestigious program, was a little bit difficult. And as you said, it's not a normal career choice. So overall, the supply and demand for such programs is low. And that's how I ended up looking abroad, looking at the US, for bachelor's programs, and I ended up finding a very good one. But I think, yeah, it really comes with sort of the open-mindedness and support of your family and of the people around you. And I feel very lucky to have had that.
So what how was life, both academic and non-academic for you, Yash, when you were probably
Yeah,
young, 18, 19, something, not only
yeah,
at Cornell University in New York, but your
yeah,
master's with the IDS at University of Sussex in the UK. What sort of
yeah.
life did young Yash live? Uh,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, not to fall into stereotypes, but it was amazing, right? So I think when we are younger, we are often more resilient in some ways. We are more open. And I was 17 when I left India for the US, never having traveled abroad once for a week to Bangkok. I had never gone to the US as an adult before then. And I think that um, it's a lot of change, it's a lot of adjustment. But often at that age, we are quite open, we are flexible, we fall into things quite easily. And I think Cornell was a really good transition because the university is also very thoughtful about international students, about helping them find good friend groups, about helping them sort of support them with resources because they know that you are new to the country, you're new to the system. Um, I think academically it was just a mind broadening experience. Having grown up in the sort of Maharashtra state board system, or even no matter where you go, I think the capacity for critical thinking and critical thought in Indian education, unfortunately, I feel is quite low. It's not something that's prioritized. So the priority is on get good marks and move ahead, whether by rote memorization or whatever. Just do it and get ahead. Whereas at Cornell, you're made to ask questions. You're made to answer difficult questions. I still remember, if you know the movie Bambi, the Disney movie Bambi, about the little deer
mhm.
that has its parents killed by a hunter. In one of my environmental conservation classes, literally the first day, the first minute of the class, the professor walks in and says, I think that he made us watch the scene where Bambi's mother is shot. And then he says, I would argue that killing Bambi's mother was not a bad thing. Discuss. And when you start with such a controversial perspective or viewpoint, you're really forced to ask tough questions. You're really forced to question a lot of assumptions that you hold. And that really helps you form the capacity for critical thinking, for questioning yourself, for reforming opinions, forming opinions and reforming them, because often we don't even form opinions, right? Like we read what's on WhatsApp, we are told something by people around us, and we accept it as the truth. But this capacity for thinking for yourself, literally, is what it is. I think that was probably the biggest gift that I got from Cornell. Of course, I learned a lot of content, but I think it's the way of thinking, the way of approaching things. I think that is, to me, the most lasting and formative impact on me that I can see from having been to Cornell. Content-wise, I studied a lot. We had lots of electives. So of course you have to study the core sciences, the core whatever. But then we also had to take many different classes. So I took a class in filmmaking. I took a class where I actually had to create like a little film and give it some thought. I took a class in Turkish history because why not? Ottoman history. So I think there was a lot of you can really indulge some of your other faculties, and I think that also helps you create sort of more rounded personality, which I found to be really 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 amazing. I'm really grateful for that. And then social life, I think again is kind of similar in that mind broadening aspect where you meet so many different people. Having grown up in Dombivali, I mean, wonderful place, but I could, like you're surrounded by 80% of the people around you Marathi speaking. Um, we all belong to very similar backgrounds, very similar. Everything is very similar, and to go from there to Cornell, where you're meeting people from literally all over the world, I think that was really cool, and I ended up forming very deep friendships with people that I wouldn't have met in India. So some of my closest friends are Pakistani, and that would never happen, obviously, in Mumbai. Or there, yeah, just I think you really broaden your experience, your horizons, and I find that really valuable.
You know, I was when you were narrating the story of this Disney film Bambi and how your professor on the first day of the class walks in, shows you the little clip, and has a little discussion or a debate or a dialogue in the class about whether Bambi, the deer's mother, being shot was right or wrong or good or bad. Uh,
Yeah.
and then getting one to think differently reminded me of a beautiful incident that happened when my son was, I think, what, 6 or 7 years old. And,
Hmm.
the place that I was living those days in Pune was a large housing colony, housing society with about 12 buildings around a quite a beautiful and a nice garden, which was at the center of the housing complex. And I was living on the second floor of a three-story building. And
Hmm.
early morning, I think it must be 6:37.
Hmm.
Probably it was a weekend. I'm not too sure. It was many years back. Uh,
Hmm.
I hear a set of dogs barking and barking quite loud,
Hmm.
as if they are kind of not playing game, but probably they are at some kind of a fight with each other. So I
Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
woke up with that sound, and I walk up to my balcony on the second floor, and which overlooks the garden in front. And what I
Hmm.
see is there are about four or five dogs who are
Hmm.
chasing a young piglet who somehow got
Oh no.
found its place there. And the dogs, each of them, were one by one in turn biting and injuring the little piglet. And that game was going
Mm.
on for quite a while. And of course,
Hmm.
one could easily figure out the end game being that the four of them would end up, taking the piglet for food. And I couldn't,
Yeah.
see what was going in front of me. And the emotions overcame,
Yeah.
and I was kind of looking up if there is somebody walking around. And
Yeah.
I found somebody, and I kind of called that person and says, I asked him, if you can probably shoo the dogs away and somehow get the piglet saved. And
Hmm.
while that
Hmm.
was also happening, there were tall trees in the garden where suddenly out of nowhere, half a dozen or a dozen of crows came along.
Mm.
Obviously, they also felt that they also have a part in the kill. That's how the animal world works. So
Absolutely.
this gentleman who was taking probably a morning walk, felt just like me. He picked up a stone or two and threw at the dogs. And after a
Hmm.
while, the dogs went away, and the piglet was saved. And the piglet ran away. Of course,
Wow.
it was very, very injured and blood oozing out.
Yeah.
And while this was
Yeah.
happening, my 6 or 7-year-old son, hardly 3 foot something or 4 feet something, uh, standing
Right.
next to me and watching all this. And he then tugs me and says, Baba, what did you do? This was all in
Yeah.
Marathi. So
Right. Right.
I saved the piglet. You know what that little fellow said? He said, but
Right.
Baba, won't the dogs go hungry today? Won't the
Hmm.
crows go hungry today?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
my entire idea of
Yeah.
ethics and
Two sides to.
morality was kind of
Yeah.
turned upside down. So you are absolutely right. This critical thinking, which is so very
Hmm.
important, where conformity and obedience is probably what all of us, especially in the culture that we have grown up with, is cherished as a value. And
Hmm.
dissent is seen as something which is not appropriate. But somehow in the world that
Hmm.
we live today, and the critical thinking that you talked about, both that you experienced in Cornell or the UK, is so very
Hmm.
important, isn't it? To question just about everything around you, not with
Yeah.
the idea of criticism, but to answer deeper questions. I'm sure that is getting played
Yeah.
out in the work that you are doing in Africa.
Yeah. It often is, and I mean, just a simple example is I come from a conservation background, and in at least in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, the greatest driver of deforestation is actually agriculture, because people don't have enough land. The people are not food secure. They don't have enough food, and one of the responses to that is let's create more land from the forest. Let's clear the land and let's plant it to have more food. So I think there it's a very gray area, because on the one hand obviously you want to protect what little there is left of the forest and of sort of the biodiversity around you, but at the same time, um, you have to ensure that people are food secure. And I think that dealing with that needs sort of an acknowledgement that it's a gray area. There's no black and white, and a lot of conservation organizations often make the mistake of thinking that it is black and white, but I don't think it is. And I think you have to deal with the nuance of it, understanding that both sides have valid points, and how do we now find a solution that kind of is a compromise that achieves both? Because, yeah, I mean, long-term food security for farmers is the best way to ensure that the forest is conserved. Because if they're not food secure, they'll continue to clear the forest. So I think there are very real questions like that in everyday life.
So Yash, this paradox of conservation and development that I guess all of us face at the moment, and you beautifully articulated in the context of sub-Saharan Africa, where you talked about the greatest challenge that region of the world faces is deforestation, and yet you also have to clear some forests for creating agricultural land. So in the work that you're doing in conservation and supporting agriculture through your One Acre Fund, what sort of everyday reality you are facing, and what is the larger context of rural Africa, especially Malawi, the country that you are living and working in?
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe I'll start with just a couple of minutes on Malawi. So I think it's a small country in southeastern Africa, with quite a high population density and only one growing season. So the capacity for irrigation is quite low. So you only really have sort of the monsoon season of Malawi is when you can grow crops. And so that makes it quite a challenging place to do agriculture, to make sure that we have food security. In all aspects, it's a wonderful place. It's a very warm country with warm people, very easy to live in, I think, in many ways, and often reminds me of living of like being in rural areas in India, right? So whenever I often meet farmers that will remind me of my grandparents, because they are older and they have similar mannerisms, or they're thinking the same way, and I'll always say, oh, this is like my aji, this is like my grandmother. So in that way I feel very at home. But with that, with the rural aspect, with the single growing season, with often the age aspect of a lot of farmers, or maybe the illiteracy aspect of many farmers, there also come many challenges that go back to that sort of development conservation paradox. So one of the big things that I took away from my time at my master's at the University of Sussex at IDS was starting to think more and more about behavior change and behavioral economics as a key aspect of development. And I think the work that we do in agriculture in Malawi is a mixture of what can science do for you? So what are the right technologies to help you grow more food? And what can behavior change, behavioral economics, what can that do for you to drive, to make sure that the science, the technology, the trainings are actually adopted by the people, by the clientele that you're working with? And I think bringing those two together is often quite hard. If we think about just simply, even in India, I mean, of course, we've gone through COVID years, and the science told us, okay, you have to do A, B, C, but driving that behavior change in people is very, very hard across such a large population, across all age groups and education groups. And I think that's kind of the crux of our work. So in Malawi, what the program is trying to do is saying, if we adopt these good quality seeds, if we apply this kind of fertilizer at the right time, and if we make these technologies affordable, and if we are able to train on them well, farmers can grow more food in the amount of land that they have. And eventually, the idea would be that farmers are not just food secure, but they're able to grow more than just what they need to eat. They can grow something extra for profit, to sell for profit. And I think that's when we can start saying, okay, now we are getting to a point where farmers don't need to clear more land. They don't need to deforest more land to grow food and to become prosperous. They can grow more and be prosperous in the amount of space that they have, because they have the right tools, the right knowledge, and they're adopting this behavior that's letting them do more with what they have. Yeah, so I think it's a challenging task, and we have setbacks. If you think about trying to get your parents or your grandparents to change something that they've done for years, we all know it's hard. We are all set in our ways, and I think, how do we approach that behavior change? How do we train? I think these are all kind of touchy-feely subjects, if I can say that. There's kind of soft skills that we have to adopt to make sure that behavior change happens.
Social enterprises like yours, the One Acre Fund, which could also be termed as an NGO, non-governmental organization,
Right.
do have to work within the boundaries and the rules and policies that the government lays down, isn't it?
Yes.
So in the work that you're doing as a country director for One Acre Fund in Malawi, what sort of interfaces that you have to engage with the local government, and what is the experience that you have, and how do you negotiate those relationships? Love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think right off the bat, what I would say is often, and we can kind of question why this is, but often in sub-Saharan Africa, I feel like it's not as hard to be a foreign organization as compared to what I would think it would be in India. And so, we do have clear rules and systems in place in terms of how to engage and how to interface with all levels of government. There is a roadmap essentially to do a lot of the things that you want to do, which is really helpful. So we have kind of the very local engagement. So let's say in the Indian equivalent of a gram panchayat and a sarpanch, like we have to start from that level, at the community level. We have to start getting their buy-in and their support to do what we are doing. Going all the way to the district level, and then eventually to kind of the national government level. So thankfully, we have a very competent team that does all this work. And, like I said, there's a roadmap. So we know that, okay, we have to get a sign off from the sarpanch of this area, then we have to get a sign off from the district to do the work that we're doing. Then we have to be in touch with the national government on the content of the trainings or the products that we are providing. So there is we're kind of doing quite broad-based engagement. And then there's the regulatory aspect, which is sometimes a little bit more difficult. So, there might be quality testing, there might be taxation, there might be, you're allowed to train on this, but not on that. So I think that is part of any government and any context that you work in. So we also have to deal with that. But generally, it's been, again, sort of, in Malawi, I think we've been very lucky to have supportive government, supportive communities, and we've been able to do what we want to do with quite some success, which, something to be grateful for. And I think this work, I was just going to say, like, this work, again, like, Malawi being sort of, in some ways, a more open place than India, where power is a little bit more accessible. I think I've personally been able to meet the Minister for Agriculture or other cabinet level members. We even had the president visit one of our kind of demonstration booths at one of the agricultural fairs. So I think it's really interesting to see that and to have that experience, both as a person, but also as an organization, to have that access to power. so that we can do a little bit of advocacy. We can build some more fluency with our programs and our work in the corridors of power, so to speak.
One of the things which interests me as a subject, and I'm a student of this subject for many years in various contexts of the nature of self-worth and dignity that we humans cherish and pursue.
Yes.
And often in my observation and study, I have found that those at the bottom of the pyramid, if I can use that phrase, seems to value this sense of self-worth and dignity very, very high. For example, microfinance is one of the great tools that is available for ensuring development of people and societies and communities at the bottom of the pyramid, where they don't have access to, let's say, formal banking, finance, etc., etc. And of course, over the last decade or two, this whole process has become very scientific and process oriented. I'm talking about in the Indian context. And the little study that I have done more as a personal interest has revealed that the level of repayment that happens at that level is one of the highest, unlike the large corporates who not only default, but they default big, causing a big chaos in the economy. However, the small subsistence farmer seems to be very religiously, not only taking the inputs from the support systems like yours, but even ensuring payback. How is that behavior being experienced by you in Malawi? Love to hear that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think what we have experienced is smallholder farmers, as you say, will often religiously repay. Our repayment rates have been in the high 90s for the last 3-4 years, 97%, 98%, even 99% one year. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, it comes back to self-worth and dignity. So, we are dealing with farmers who are fighting for something very fundamental, like in the old, maybe Indian way of roti, kapda, and makan, so food, clothing, and shelter. I think we're talking about food, the very first thing that you need, the very basic thing that you need. And what we have seen is farmers rightly and rationally will put food security above everything else. We will often meet with farmers who honestly almost don't care what the price of something is, whether in terms of labor, whether in terms of money, if it ensures that they can have enough food throughout the year, if it ensures that they don't have to go out to buy food, which can be at any price, which is very risky, or to ask for food from neighbors or family, because obviously their dignity is tied to the idea that we can provide for our families, that we have enough food in the house, we are food secure. There's a specific status and respect that comes with that, which is totally understandable. And often what we will see this is something maybe in some ways similar in rural communities in India, but I feel like I've seen that more strongly in sub-Saharan Africa. The sense of community well-being is so strong that often our farmers have big yields, and they will share the bags of food with their neighbors who maybe didn't have a good harvest because they weren't part of the program. So we will often see that sort of thing, and I think it comes back to that dignity question. So yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of smallholder farmers prioritize being food secure, having that dignity, having that self-worth, that I have provided for the family, that we have enough to eat. We are not going to be starving. They really want that, to achieve that, which is totally rational. And the way that they show their commitment to that is by repaying the loans so that they can come back and join the program again next year. So yeah, I think for us, it's a very fundamental thing, and we value that also by giving respect and giving dignity to our clients, right? So they're not beneficiaries, they're not people who are getting quote unquote handouts, but they are clients who are paying us full cost for a service that we are providing, which means that just like any of the service industry in India would provide you excellent service, that's the kind of service that we need to provide our farmers. If we are short on anything, we need to provide discounts. We need to say sorry. If they have complaints, we have a hotline that they can call. And this also helps build that sense of dignity that you're treated as a respected customer, not as a problem, not as a handout beneficiary, but somebody who can call and complain and be heard. So I think that's very important to our ethos as One Acre Fund and also to development work, I think, in general.
Then, having said that, then, it would be worth also to ask ourselves, I think, Yash, that the world of economics with metrics such as, return on capital employed or capital efficiency and so on and so forth, where everything is around tangible, measurable, parameters. What is it that this world of economics can learn from the community living, where well-being of oneself and the other, which is so non-quantifiable and non-measurable, actually is so very important? What is it that this world of organized economics can learn from the so-called not so organized communities?
I think that is the big question, right? How do you put a price or a cost on things that are intangible? I think going back again to my time at IDS, this was one of the big aha moments that I had. I mean, I had experienced this in my work in the few years before going to IDS. But IDS has sort of a ethos that's focused on qualitative indicators and not just quantitative indicators. It has a history as what in India we would call maybe a more socialist or leftist leaning organization. But I think that comes this very important thing about focusing not just on the quantitative numbers, but on the qualitative quality of life, on dignity, on self-worth, on respect. And I think that is critical to understanding how to drive forward development. It is critical to understanding why some big, yojanas and policies fail while some others do very well. Because as humans, we are pushed to do things not just through numbers, but through kind of how we feel while doing them or while accessing specific services. So I think it is important to keep that in mind. I don't have a perfect answer except to say that, it's, I mean, like I said, it is the big question. And I think what I would say is, again, thinking about education and what we learn, maybe the starting point is having these conversations. Maybe the starting point is having experiences like I had at Cornell or at IDS that make you question, am I doing, is this hard data the only way to do things? Or what can we learn from human interactions, from qualitative work, from focus groups, from sitting with farmers under the people tree and asking them about their life and about their sort of, again, kind of soft things like how they feel, what their aspirations are. I think all of this is quite important to understand the problems and then to start addressing them.
No, I guess, this conversation, Yash, actually is leading me personally to a thought where how a world which is full of discrimination, denial, and deprivation is repurposed or re-looked at from the lens of conserving and enhancing human self-worth and dignity. And how do we build systems and societies and economies around this concept? And beyond the label of socialism or capitalism, those isms, I guess, are traps, according to me. We just have to go beyond that and say, in the end, human dignity and human well-being should be the be-all and end-all goal, is what this conversation is leaving me with. But as we end this conversation, would love to hear from you, Yash, that where do you go from here?
Personally or
personally?
Sure. Yeah. I think personally, something that I've said in the past is, and we talked about it a little bit, is agriculture or often work in development and agriculture is a lifestyle and it's a life choice. It's not necessarily just a career choice. I think life in rural Africa is very different from Mumbai or Pune or New York or London. It's not glamorous in the same way that many people, and nothing wrong with that. There's no judgment there. But I guess for me personally, like the slower moving pace, the access to nature, the open, like kind of, yeah, the openness of the landscape. I think all of these are important aspects for me, and they're part of my choice for being here rather than being anywhere else. So I think I continue to see myself working in sort of rural spaces, both geographically and from a work perspective. I think that on the work front, thinking again about sort of a lifestyle choice or a life commitment, I think the next big challenge that will come, or is already here, not will come, is climate change and agriculture. So, for years we've been fighting to become more food secure. And I think that fight is not done. It's not going to end because the conditions around us are now changing. And I think, it can be as small as, oh, it rained in February and March in the Konkan Coast, and our hapus, our Alfonso mango harvest is small. So, it can start from complaints on what I know it's an essential in many of our minds, but let's call it a luxury on saying that some luxury food items are reducing, and the same thing is predicted to happen to cocoa, for example, chocolate.
Yes.
To thinking about the essential. So last year we had in 2022 we had the heat wave in March when I was actually in Mumbai, and it was 40 Celsius in March.
Yes.
And what that did is it killed off our wheat yields. So coming back to the essentials of roti, of chapati, of roti, of bread, that is also now in question, right? So I think we are seeing the spectrum of effects of climate change, and I think personally that will be a very daunting, very interesting, very stimulating. Maybe in the end, I hope not, but maybe in the end, a kind of pessimistic. I don't know. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But I think there is a lot of work to be done there. And I think what we are fighting for essentially is going back to this question of food security, of self-worth, and of dignity. So, often in the field, I'll meet farmers who it rained for 3 straight days, and they had worked for 3 months on their crop, and their field just was waterlogged, was flooded away, and there's literally nothing in the field. You go to the field and all you see is mud because the entire crop has gone away. So how do we recover from that? How do we mitigate that? What are the things that we can do to support such farmers? And in general, going from the individual to sort of the meta, what do we do to support our food systems? Because this is not going to go away. Heat waves are not going to go away. Cyclones and floods, unseasonal rain is not going to go away. So I think that is intellectually a stimulating challenge from a scientific perspective, a stimulating challenge, a very sobering thought, a humbling thought from a personal and human perspective. I think we have some big challenges ahead of us, but that's kind of where I see myself working is in a future that grapples with climate change and agriculture.
Climate change, as you very rightly said, is such a big thing which is not going to leave anything untouched. Every aspect of human life or life in general on this planet will get affected with the larger changes that are happening. But I guess I am optimistic. I am positive about 2 things: about the resilience of life in general. Specifically, the species called the human species will find itself to adapt. But I'm actually more optimistic, Yash, about the hope and rather belief that for some of the largest questions that we are trying to find answers for, the answers will come from small places like Malawi, small places or small communities that you work with. So I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, Yash, to have met somebody who's actually working on the grassroots with the soil, with the farmers, where the human story all began, several millions of years back. So what a wonderful conversation this has been, Yash. I think you are leaving me with a lot of hope and optimism and pride in the kind of work that young Indians like you are doing in a place called Africa, Malawi to be specific. So this has been a very enriching conversation for me. Love to hear from you. How has this been for you?
No, same here. I mean, I feel like we covered a lot of practical and intellectual ground, which is always exciting. Always exciting to have a conversation of this level. Just to again, coming out of it with hope and optimism that there are conversations like this happening. I'm grateful to you for inviting me to this amazing platform, and also for the work that you've done to provide airtime for all of these sorts of different career pathways, different life choices, and these different questions. I think this is part of, even if we didn't do it in school, I think this is part of our education of broadening our minds, broadening our horizons, asking questions, questioning assumptions. I think, and so this is very, very critical work that you're doing. I'm thankful and humbled that you included me in the list of amazing people that have come before me and that will come after me. So thank you for your time as well.
You are equally amazing, Yash, and wish you Yash, which is success in everything that you do in your life. So take care of yourself. Wish you good luck, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for your time today, my dear listeners. This is your host, Milind Agnihotri, signing off. Goodbye, take care, and stay safe. This podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered as a piece of any professional advice. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of its guest. Creators of this podcast expressly disclaim any and all liability or responsibility for any direct or indirect, consequential or other damages arising out of any individual's use of this podcast. For feedback and suggestions, please write to wingsindia75@gmail.com. Thank you.